Today we're exploring the hurdle stitch, an easy and seemingly reversible stitch pattern, at least on paper. First, we'll explore the stitch pattern and how the physical structure of the knit and purl looking stitches affect the look of the fabric, so it's not actually reversible. Then we'll explore not just one, but 3 variations of a reversible hurdle stitch that each have a different character. Throughout, we'll use the stitch structure to easily identify stitches and count rows accurately. If you're new to knitting, check out the Learn to Knit the ABCs in Cotton series for the basics used in this video. They're linked in the description below. So let's knit. The hurdle stitch is usually written as a 2-stitch 4-row repeat. I've marked the odd row side so we can keep track. Row 1 and row 2 are worked as straight knit rows. Row 1 is here. Row 2 is worked on the other side, so the stitches are purl looking on the marked side, the reverse stitch of how they were worked. Row 3 and row 4 are worked as repeat, knit 1, purl 1. In rows 3 and 4, the knit looking stitches create vertical ribs, alternating with purl looking vertical ribs. With 3 repeats, you can see the pattern easily. Looking at the chart, it really looks like this should already be reversible. The knit stitch is the reverse of the purl stitch and vice versa. And the hurdle stitch pattern is a combination of 2 horizontal garter stitch rows and 2 vertical 1x1 rib rows, which are both truly reversible and fundamental to reversible knitting. But if we turn the swatch over, it doesn't really look the same. Here are the sides next to each other. You can see the difference. The reason for this is how the stitch structure of knit-looking stitches and purl-looking stitches physically interact with each other. In general, knit stitches lie under purl stitches when they're stacked, for example in horizontal rows. You can see it in the 2 garter stitch rows. The purl-looking ridge is visible over the knit-looking stitches on both sides. However, knit stitches lie on top of purl stitches when they're next to each other, for example in vertical ribs. You can see this in the 1x1 rib section. The knit-looking stitches are layered on top of the purl-looking stitches, again on both sides. For the hurdle stitch on this side, the purl-looking garter ridge is just above the 1x1 rib section, and on the other side, the purl-looking garter ridge is just below the 1x1 rib section. The knit-looking garter ridge changes the tilt of the purl ridge above or below. There are many options for better reversible alternatives for the hurdle stitch, and we'll explore 3. For the first one, I'm choosing to replace both garter stitch rows, one to a third 1x1 rib, and the first one to the reverse rib. In this way, the knit-looking vertical rib on each side is interrupted by a purl-looking stitch every 4 rows. So the first variation of a reversible hurdle stitch has a 2-stitch 4-row repeat and is worked row 1, repeat, purl 1, knit 1, and rows 2, 3, and 4, repeat, knit 1, purl 1. You can use the stitch structure to easily keep track of the rows. Stitches are defined by how they're connected to the stitch below. A knit stitch lies on top of the stitch below, so comes forward. Counting the knit-looking stitches using the legs, you can see 3 knit-looking stitches after the purl bump of the first row. This variation looks the most similar to the right side of the original hurdle stitch, and I actually like it better because the purl-looking stitch anchors the bottom of the knit-looking rib nicely, and the knit-looking stitch in between is pushed to the back. The second variation is to keep one of the garter rows from the original hurdle stitch pattern and remove the second one completely. Now the stitch pattern is worked as a 3-row repeat. These types of patterns are my favorites, as repeats with an odd number of rows are naturally reversible. I have lots of 1 and 3-row repeat pattern videos. They're linked below. Starting on the marked side, we can see what happens after 1 repeat. Row 1, knit across. Rows 2 and 3, repeat, knit 1, purl 1. Because of the odd row repeat, the next repeat, which I've marked with a stitch marker, starts on the other side. The result is for the next repeat, the knit across row looks like purls on the marked side. With 3 repeats, you can see that it's technically a 6-row repeat. You can read your knitting by watching for 2 knit and purl looking stitches. Then you know it's time for the row 1, the straight knit row. As with the original hurdle stitch, you can see how the stitches physically impact each other near the straight knit row. The third variation is to double the width of the rib of the first variation. Now the stitch pattern is a 4-stitch 4-row repeat. Row 1, repeat purl 2, knit 2, and rows 2, 3, and 4, repeat knit 2, purl 2. Stitches are defined as purl when they go under the stitch below, so out the back of the stitch below. The purl bump is actually the top of the previous stitch. To count purl stitches, you can use the purl bump covering the legs of the stitch. After 4 rows, you can see 3 purl bumps over the knit-looking stitch from the first row. Depending on your vision for your project, the 3 variations will have a different character. For the test swatch my mother knit, she used Lion Brand impeccable yarn and 4.5mm needles, so the smaller scale of the first 2 variations work well. If you're aiming for something more substantial looking than the fine 1x1 rib, the third variation works really well. Here's an example of a cozy shawl I made with Lion Brand cozy wool and 7mm needles. There are many more easy variations. A combination of the second and third variations result in the reversible basket weave stitch pattern, a wide 3-row repeat. I used this stitch in the video to create a transverse Mobius project if you're looking for an interesting challenge. Included in that video is a grafting technique that's intuitive rather than mnemonic. It's linked in the description below. For the next video, we're exploring the rope rib stitch, an eye-catching vertical rib that looks like braided rope by making use of stitch orientations. So pick up your knitting and create something awesome. I'll do my best to respond to comments, and I'd love to hear about your favorite reversible knitting pattern. Also feel free to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more awesome reversible knitting. For those of you still here, the last few years I've been working hard to find simple ways to feel better, what I call my daily well-being practices. This is not medical advice, I'm just sharing what works for me. Today's well-being practice is to identify and overcome the hurdles in our life. Obstacles increase friction and reduce momentum, especially for completing daily and weekly tasks that we're not thrilled about. Cass from Clutterbug has a great video about how to reduce friction to make our life easier. For example, organizing cleaning supplies to smooth out getting started, listening to music or a podcast to keep our mind occupied, and reducing clutter in general so it's just easier. I even try to make the hurdles a feature, like in today's stitch, perhaps as a contrast to what we enjoy doing. When I'm working on an unpleasant task, I'm looking forward to getting back to knitting. Have an awesome day!
Ma, 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 ma.